Meeting to order. Odell Harris is out of town. Jaime Lopez left me a note this afternoon that he was unavailable, and Janet Johnson has a health-related issue that's keeping her from appearing today. I understand that Paul Kitchen has been reappointed and was sworn in moments ago. So the first item on the agenda will be the approval of the July minutes. Has everybody had an opportunity to review those minutes? Are there any additions or corrections? Is there a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Minutes are approved. The next item on the agenda is the public agenda, and I think I saw Vincent write his name down. So, Vincent, would you come and speak to us?
I'll make it brief and topical. I notice you guys will be discussing something later where a citizen alleged that an officer initially refused to allow her to search the vehicle, and then the detective threatened to arrest her. If you guys look at the facts of that case and found out that there was a threat that says, if you don't let me search the vehicle, I will arrest you. I just want to go on the record and say, while the First Amendment and its 5 clauses are my passion, I also see across our nation an increasing just disrespect for the Fourth Amendment by our officers. The courts are partially to blame. They've told our officers, you don't have to remind the citizens that they have rights until you're arresting them with this wonderful little thing called the Miranda warning. Whether it's a consensual conversation or a Terry frisk because there's some reasonable articulable suspicion of a crime, or if it's an arrest. In all 3 of those cases, the citizen has the right to not answer questions. The problem is, our wonderful training academy, of which we have a guy here who represents them, and I do appreciate him, our officers are being trained. Go ahead and ask incriminating questions in a casual conversation. Go ahead and ask them during a Terry stop. You don't have to tell the citizens that anything they say can and will be used against them. And if an officer says, well, I'll arrest you if you don't let me search, a search is only legal if it's done via probable cause or uncoerced consent or exigent circumstances. And we have to train in my opinion, our officers should stick to 2 questions, name and address. And if you're driving, the papers. Anytime they ask you, hey, where are you going today? Or anything else like that, anyone who's got a lawyer will just say, no, thank you, I don't answer those types of questions. So I really think it's a training issue of we just need to have the officers stop asking irrelevant questions, stop stomping on the Fourth Amendment, and just keep it to business. I think we'll all sleep better at night. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think there's any other public comments, so we have one of our newest members, Kevin.
Hey, how you doing?
Welcome aboard. I'm Jay Fowler. Tell us who. I'm Jay Fowler. I'm the chair. I'm a lawyer here in town. Why don't I just go around and Denny?
I'm Denny Bender. What do you do?
Pleasure.
Paul Kitchen, teach at Northwest High School.
Awesome. Pleasure.
Ricardo Harris.
Twyla Purity. I'm new to the board also.
Thanks.
I'm Sharon Eelslager, and I'm waiting to see if I'm reappointed, so you may or may not see me ever again.
Hi, Kevin. I'm Sean Rojas.
Pleasure.
Hi, Kevin. Jennifer McGowan. I'm city attorney and legal counsel to the board.
All right. Well, I'm Kevin Harrison.
Welcome aboard. All right, the next item on the agenda is the city manager and chief's response to our report and recommendations. And I understand the chief is going to appear by teams, I think. And the city manager is here. You want to?
There.
There he is.
Man on the move.
How do we want to handle this? You want to? We can get you the mic here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for background, as you know, we issued the report some time ago and actually dated April 5th that had a summary of our findings of the review we made and contained 8 separate recommendations that we asked that the department and the city consider. And one of the points made in the report was that we would ask for a response. And so I know the city has been working on it and talking about it and trying to address those issues, so I thought we'd just turn it over to you folks, and you can brief us, and then we can have questions.
Great, thank you, Jay. Good afternoon, everybody, and I want to thank you again for serving on the board and for being here today. What I'd like to do, I want to use your time efficiently. I was going to go through each of the recommendations and briefly tell you what we've done to date. But if you want a different format or approach, I'm more than happy to follow your lead. I also, as Jay said, we've got Chief Moore here, and I'm going to ask him to weigh in on a few issues as well as we talk about the response. As you know, we took the report pretty seriously. You put a lot of effort into the review of the text messages, and then more importantly, coming back with recommendations, not just regarding the text messages themselves, but what it meant for the police department and our organization. And as you know, one of the things that I had visited with the mayor and council about was doing an outside assessment of the police department. And if you were to look at the request for proposals that went out to select a consultant, you'll see that your recommendations served as part of the scope of services for that contract or for that RFP and then the ultimate contract. There are some other items that are in there that I thought were important, as well as some items that the mayor and council asked to be included. So when I respond, this will be the first of probably several updates for you, because with your recommendations incorporated into the scope of services, that means we'll be getting work back from the consultant. We selected Jensen Hughes. The council just awarded that contract on Tuesday. They are one of the premier firms in law enforcement work, private sector law enforcement consulting, and their credentials are impeccable. They worked with the city of Louisville after the Breonna Taylor incident, did a kind of top to bottom review of the department. They also came into Minneapolis after the death of George Floyd and helped the city of Minneapolis look at how they responded to the civil unrest as well as other issues in the department. They've also worked with San Francisco and Oakland, California, Denver and Boulder, Colorado and Miami, as well as a number of other cities, but those are cities that I think have some bearing on the work that we do based on their size. Your first recommendation talked about the private messaging and establishing a code of conduct for our police officers is both when they're on duty but also off duty. And that was incorporated into the scope of services, and the actual wording is that the consultant will establish personnel policies and training that defines the extent and scope of accountability for off-duty conduct, and particularly conduct that jeopardizes the public's trust and confidence in the department, including but not limited to social media and private messaging policies. So their final report, which will include findings and recommendations, will be built around that item, a portion of their report. Chief, there are some other things you wanted to mention regarding policies that right now have been adopted by the department. Some have been on the books for a long time. Others may be more recently added. And then the training that we have done around those items. And they'll all be reviewed by Jensen Hughes as well. But Chief, do you want to talk about that at all?
Well, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, all right. First I want to explain my tire. I'm just outside of Lyman. I'm in 7 hours into my 8.5-hour drive to the first day of my vacation, so I apologize for not being suited in a professional attire, but pulled over at a truck stop right now to have this meeting. Yes, as far as the recommendations go, WPD, we're hitting on each of the aspects of the recommendation, but as we all know, things take time, and we have to make sure we vet and provide the proper information for, that we're going to provide to the officers out there. Some of the things that we have already accomplished in the different aspects is the training. looking at the training that the officers have gone through. In the month of May, and Sergeant Kimball's in the room, and he'll be able to articulate a little bit more if we need more, but we had panels, diversity panels, that showed up at the training academy, and all 700 officers, we a little bit less than that because we're on at full staff, but all 680 officers that we had on staff, commissioned officers, went through that training, and it consisted of an hour of African-American leaders and an hour of Hispanic Latino leaders that are sitting in front of our officers each day, every day. We had Odell Harris actually attend and participate in that. So when he gets back, he'll be able to also give you an update. But the panels went really well. I got a report of some days were very intense. The conversations were I guess, enlightening to not only our officers, but to the panel members, because they were able to get a different perspective from having conversations with the officers. But it's something that we are going to continue to do annually. So once a year, we're going to make sure that we have these panels set up so that we have community leaders that are coming in and actually being the voice of community people, citizens that they interact with, and actually hearing firsthand some of the complaints, some of the concerns, some of the issues that the citizens are experiencing with the officers. And and there were times where there were things that were addressed involving the officers that are actually interacting with the citizens that they were talking about. So they were able to have a more detailed discussion along those lines. One of the discussions, and this one right here is one that infuriated me initially. However, during the Latino panel, one of the community leaders had asked one of the officers to, hey, why don't officers just go and learn Spanish? Why don't they just, get the basics and learn Spanish, and that way you can interact and communicate a lot easier. And one of the officers says, hey, we do a lot of training, we do what we can do. Why don't you set up, the ability for, Spanish speaking people to speak English? And for me, I'm thinking, well, that's not an appropriate response. That's not a objective response. And so initially I got frustrated. However, one of the panel members, the Hispanic panel members, looked at me and said, hey, Chief, we have to have these tough conversations, in order to move forward, in order to keep that trust going. And so it allows those officers to be able to feel comfortable in speaking and learning from their experiences and interacting with the different cultures. We are in the process of also setting up training, civil rights, color of law training with the DLJ. They were supposed to come through the month of August. Sergeant Kimball is in charge of that, and he stated that their trainers, something happened with the federal trainers to where they weren't able to come in the month of August, but here in the next few weeks or so, they should be establishing a date for them to come and train all of our officers on the color of law. So they're going to get that aspect of everyday training. We've also opened up squad room training to where at the beginning of the shift, each officer, anything that's current along the lines of, text messages and anything along with communication, things that are happening in our community, we have squad room trainings for officers at the beginning of their shift to where they can sit with the supervisor and hear these current events and learn from other agencies' experiences and missteps so that they actually have an understanding of where that's going. Now, as far as adding things like that in the policies, as far as text messages and having it open to the public, and once it becomes known to the public that it's no longer protected information, that's where, as the city manager stated, the third party is going to be able to review that and be able to give us more of an appropriate response. As far as the WPD, we are still experiencing text messages that aren't of racist nature or anything, but just maybe rude, that come across our desk, and we're still investigating them because it was brought to our attention and it's open to the public. So until someone says it's a violation of someone's First Amendment right, we're still pursuing those because they're brought to our attention, and we're still investigating them.
So I have a question about those text messages that you referred here at the last part of your what you were saying. So what are these new text messages? You're starting to review folks' text messages, or are these left over from the original event?
No, these are supervisors that actually are included in the text message, maybe from one officer to another officer, and the officer doesn't realize the supervisor's included, and they may say, oh, that citizen's a jerk, or that was, these are new things. And so the supervisor's like, well, that's not right, that's not nice, and, and since that's a supervisor, I have to report this kind of conversation. And so they're doing their, due diligence to speak up and intervene, and we are addressing those issues as they pop up.
Thank you.
Mr. Layton, do you want to take questions on each point individually, or
Yes.
wait until you're finished?
Why don't we go ahead? I'm more than happy to take it one at a time, if that would, as long as we got the chief.
The scope of work talks about establishing policies. It doesn't say recommending policies.
Right.
Can you share what the adoption process will be? Because policy review is part of the ordinance that we're responsible for.
Right. Well, so the question, I guess what we haven't talked about how this body is integrated into the recommendations. And Jay is sitting on a review committee as well as the chair of the Diversity, Inclusion, and Civil Rights Advisory Board, so that both of those boards have a representative, and we'll get monthly reports, and then we'll see draft reports, and then we'll talk about how we bring that work back to both of those advisory boards, as well as to ultimately the council and the department will come in with administrative policies, and the council will adopt any law or ordinance if necessary to implement any of the recommendations.
I saw that in your report that Jay will have a seat on that.
So is this a different review committee, or this was, I thought it was the initial review committee that you brought forth and appointed initially? So this is a different one, or related to the consultant, a review of what the consultant's report will
The
be?
city manager will have to address it. It's,
Right.
I think it's made of the city.
It's both, right? And so the committee that helped select Jensen Hughes had 2 elected officials and 2 community representatives, and those 4 will remain in a review capacity through the entire study.
And they will determine what we get to see, what the CRB gets to see?
CRB will see everything that's in the report. The report will be public, and we'll share it with the CRB as well as Diversity, Inclusion, and Civil Rights Advisory Board. But the question will be then, what do you want to do with the recommendations of the report? What, if you'll give us guidance as we talk about implementation as well.
Thank you.
May I say something on?
I'm sorry, Chief, go ahead.
As far as the, is it okay if I speak on, as far as policies go also, and as you all know, like the Brady Giglio policy that we had back 15 years ago or so was presented to the board to review and look at. And so we do have policies that are in play right now. The use of force policy was also given to the board. I think it was a juvenile policy. So your input is definitely going to be a great contribution to the end result. And working with Mark Bennett and working with the law department, creating the Brady Giglio policy on its own self, we've learned isn't the way to go, and best practices across the nation isn't the way to go, but incorporating it into another location as far as fit for duty, things along those lines. So those are things that some of the new people on the board, you all have been working with us on over the past few months.
Yeah.
So before we go on, I guess, oh wait, we're still on number 2?
We're actually on number 1.
Oh,
The chief jumped to number 2, though, and that's, which is great. And that had to, really, that's the whole issue of talking about ongoing dialogue and training on racial bias, use of force, and other important issues in front of the department, and those that were exposed during the text messaging issue or incident. And what we've included in the scope of services is a study and evaluation of community engagement with a focus on interaction with diverse populations in the community, including but not limited to minority populations, faith-based organizations, youth, homeless, and LGBTQ plus community. And then the chief has already talked about the diversity panels and the DOJ work there. I can pause on number 2 if you'd like. Number 3 dealt with duty to intervene, which is already in existence in our policies. However, we also included that based on your recommendations, we talked about an enhancement of that through the RFP and scope of services. So the task is to create a code of conduct and training on the standards of conduct that reflect favorably on WPD employees and the department, including the duty to intervene and to report violations of WPD standards of conduct.
So I think that in the duty to intervene, the policy that I'm familiar with that the department has now is duty to intervene in the context of officer-citizen interaction, particularly with regard to use of force and those kinds of behaviors vis-a-vis the citizen. And what I think we were focusing this on was what I think Chief Moore just had a reference to, which is when an officer sees a text message or a comments made within the WPD that is outside the bounds of what's professional or appropriate, you should say no, or you should address it. It sounds like that's part of the process, but that was the focus, I think, of our recommendation.
And I think the issue of an expanded scope for duty to intervene was actually discussed over a year ago, and I don't know if it was codified, but that definitely will be an issue that will be reviewed, and then we'll get recommendations on that.
There's comments and so forth all through here on training. And WPD does a great job of training, and I think you guys do a great job of training to a lot of the things here about what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, how to deal with, people of different races, et cetera, right? So, I mean, there is that training, and all the training in the world isn't going to change people if they don't want to change. So I think there's just so much training here, but the real teeth is going to be in the consequences, in my view. So I hope at some point we get beyond the training and more into what the consequences will be. If there's duty to intervene, I appreciate that you gave that distinction, because I thought, oh my gosh, every person who was on that text message thread, then they didn't do their job of intervening, right? But if it's in that context of a contact with a civilian or a citizen, then that puts us. But then why would people split hairs? What's right is right and wrong is wrong. So all the training in the world won't fix bad apples, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I do think that one thing's important. It's training, but you need to identify the expectation.
Yeah.
And if everybody knows the expectation, you will at least incrementally over time change the culture. I mean, that I think is the process.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I was going to remind the board that this is about a cultural assessment and operational assessment, right? So we said early on that we weren't looking for 5 training classes, you check the box, and then we move on, right?
Great.
Yeah. Number 4, you had recommended the need to restore public confidence or to build additional public confidence in the police operations, and that's done through trust. And there's a specific item in the scope of services that talks about establishing a public confidence program that focuses on building trust through dignity and respect. So very close to the actual wording in your recommendation that it is included in the work to be done by the consultant.
And actionables that we included in that so far, we just completed a Citizens Youth Police Academy, so we can actually hit and start when the kids are younger. And these aren't kids that you're going to find that are straight A kids and going to get scholarship. These are kids that have had troubles in their life and they're still having troubles. And in the foster system, it was a really great success, and a lot of good work came out. I guess information came out of working with the kids. So actionably, we've also implemented building community trust through engaging, our youth, through the police academy, which you all have been through.
So is this a new program, and is the funding guaranteed for that, like from here on out? The Youth Police Academy?
And as far as the funding go, we actually go to the community, and right on the day of graduation of this one, we had a citizen there that went up to one of our juvenile intervention officers and said, "I want to fund the next one. Consider the shirts paid for and taken care of," because they actually get shirts that have Youth Citizen Police Academy on them. So right now, it's funding's coming from the community, and I believe we're engaging because people are stepping up and really wanting this to grow.
My concern, I mean, these are great programs, but they have to be sustainable, you know, and I think there's a few things that because of lack of funding, what turns out to be a great idea then just kind of falls through, and that doesn't really, I think that can disappoint the community who's paying attention, but I don't know if it's something. So if you didn't have the funding from outside, then that academy wouldn't happen. Is that what I'm understanding?
No, we would find a way.
Okay,
We would
terrific.
definitely find a way.
Thank you.
The fifth item has to do with a possible affiliation or support for groups that are known for racial bias, discrimination, and other activities contrary to the rule of law. And the scope of services provides for developing policies that address police officer affiliation with groups that support racial bias, discrimination, hate speech, and other activities contrary to the rule of law, and public service obligations of the officer.
So if they're going to develop policies, does that mean that there are no policies in place now?
There probably are. Chief, I'll let you, Paul.
Yeah, but we have multiple policies, and I can assure you, if we found that an officer was involved in sort of hate group, we would probably cite them with a death penalty of no regard to or something like that. So that is behavior that we tolerate. We should.
Okay, so there is a policy then to ferret out those folks.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Again, what we're asking a consultant to do is to review all of our policies
Right.
and measure them against best practices and their thoughts regarding best approach. So it may be that they see the policies and they believe that they need to be strengthened.
Yeah.
Or they, yeah.
I think that in the context of the recommendation, there are policies in place that would address really bad or wrongful conduct, but what we were concerned about was identifying and maybe part of training or just the culture, that some of these affiliations are not appropriate. And so that if you have an officer who hypothetically has a patch on his backpack that might suggest an affiliation, someone say, hey, what are you doing? What's going on here? That kind of questioning to establish whether there's an issue there. That was what we were trying to, I think, flag with this recommendation.
Is that, sorry, Paul, can I jump in with that? Is that something, because that's something we can bring the FBI in reference to the color law and the training that they'll probably do with the domestic extremist group as well. So, because I know there's a lot of people who don't understand what the 3% is and, the different Google movements and all those types of, the groups, the hate groups that have kind of morphed from lots of new, January 6th, just, so
Right.
I think there's a lot of groups like that we can probably bring in, just because I know there's lots of officers who don't even know what that is, there's lots of people who don't know what those movements are as well. So it might be something along those lines, because obviously that would fall under the category of following exactly what you were saying, some sort of extremist group or hate group or affiliation, whatever that might be. But it might be an education. We might need to educate departments on what these groups are. To say these are what we see as an extremist group and not affiliated with the police department. It's something along those lines, I think, is what you're getting at.
Yeah, I think when we were developing the recommendation, we saw some evidence of affiliation, but did not have a good handle on it because it was just, it was limited. And so what we were attempting to articulate was the department needs to be aware of this potential concern, and then, being aware of it, identify behaviors, acts, or things that might demonstrate affiliation, and then address it either through training and it's really part of the cultural expectation, and so all this ties together. What are officers expected, what level of performance are officers expected to perform, and what kind of culture do we want the officers to have if they're members of the department? And so that was simply to say, you got to be aware of this too, and then you need to address it. That was the thought process.
that be seen as infringing upon freedom of speech?
You know, theoretically, it could be, but, you know, if you're going to be a police officer and you've taken an oath to the Constitution and the enforcement of the rule of law, then maybe you need to make an assessment of whether you're in the right job. And more importantly, maybe the department ought to understand and engage in a dialogue with that officer about what the boundaries are. But if you don't understand the issues there and don't engage in the dialogue, then you have at least a hidden problem. And I think that's what we were talking about.
Right, I like that, and I'm glad that it's in here. One question that I have, I know that Jensen Hughes has been chosen to this research. How long of a period of time?
Great question. We're actually under contract with them for a year, but we're anticipating the work will be done in 6 months in terms of issuing a report. And there'll be monthly reports regarding their status and the work that they're doing up until that point. We did the 1 year for two reasons. One, if their work if they decide they need longer time to get us a good report, but also to help us on the implementation side. So it provides technical assistance to the department and to the city as a whole as we go forward with the implementation. And frankly, Jensen Hughes would be available to this board if it had questions and wanted their assistance.
Great, thank you.
So, Mr. Layton, thank you for saying it like that, because it sparked a thought then. So they are, maybe I have it wrong, but they're really about moving forward from this incident, right?
Right.
Okay, so everything that's happened so far, and thank you for adding, suspension to the consequences. So then all of that is just like done. Am I to understand that everything related to a text message, we've closed the book, and now we have, a consultant coming in and we're going to fix things going forward?
Yes, they're not going to come in and second guess what's been done, so to speak, but they are going to look at what occurred, look at the text messages in the context of their total review, and come back with recommendations if they see some issues that should have been handled differently, or if they say, for instance, one of the findings is not reflected in your recommendations, but it came out in a discussion about the relationship between the police department, my office, HR, and law.
Yeah.
So they're going to go back and look at what worked, what didn't work, and then what they believe we need to do going forward to make sure we're better coordinated in terms of policy development, policy review, implementation, all of that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question, and that I was kind of thinking what you were thinking about free speech, and I would like to know if you are going to have, where do you go to the FBI and get your list of hate groups? How do you determine a hate group? Most of us sitting at the table can say, I think this, some of them are blatant, but I'm just wondering if you're going to tell your officers you have to watch the groups. Well, what some people might think the Boy Scouts are a hate group. How do you define that? And how do you then tell your officers? Because to me, you're right back to legally, I'm sorry, I belong to this group and I think they're an honest group. You don't. You think their ideas are wrong and you think they're a hate group. Well, so I'm just asking, is there going to be a definition? Is there going to be a list? You got to give your officers a little more guidance than just stay away from the hate groups.
Yeah, like League of Women Voters would be one.
Yeah, there you go.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, we're communists.
Yeah.
We are communists, so.
I think there are some definitions that are defined federally, and our police department can talk more about that. But again, Jensen Hughes is going to come in and talk about what they believe best practice is, right? And so, and what they're seeing happening around the country around this issue, and it's developing. We've seen, January 6th magnified it, no doubt about it. But there's going to be a lot of discussion about how police departments are looking at that and going forward into the future, and we'll take their recommendations seriously.
Well, I just think that, you know, you shouldn't put your officers between a rock and a hard spot where they can't, you know, they don't have good guidelines, a good list, a good frame of reference to work from.
The issue of
So I'm
fairness.
concerned, I just
right.
want to make sure that they're doing that they're just not off the cuff saying that, and then the guy gets in trouble.
Sure, I agree.
You know, and in some cases, maybe innocently,
Right,
you know.
right.
So that's all.
I had a question.
Yeah.
It's kind of more just for clarification so I can get myself up to speed. And I may be understanding this incorrectly, but hopefully you can explain to me or someone can. So the way this works, these memes, they went through professional standards, right? And then professional standards kind of more or less gave it a slap on the wrist. This is not that bad. And then somehow it got to this board and it was like, whoa, this is pretty bad. Is that kind of the process this took?
A little different than that. Professional standards did the initial investigation, and then those results were given to police administration. They make the determination on the discipline, and then this board asked to review the case or cases involving text messages, and that's when everything kind of moved from that point forward.
I got you, but this board is really what escalated it. Prior to this board, it wasn't addressed too harshly.
It was not addressed very harshly at all, and this board identified, and if you've had an opportunity to read the report and recommendations, which I don't know that you have yet, but it identified the process, and then we made the review, and then it became public, and then there was a great deal of controversy. But
right, and I have a question. That's the reason I asked that, and my question is that we talked about some things. We talked about policy, and we talked about training, we talked about community involvement, and all of those are good things, but I don't think they fix, well, it would be foolish for me to think that that's the only thing that's there. I mean, there are things that don't come to this board that are probably bad. And so somewhere along the line, there should be some kind of provision in the report. And maybe there is, honestly, I haven't read it yet, but I'm hoping that there is something in there that kind of holds some accountability for full disclosure and for candor. So if possible, could you speak to that?
Sure. Got two answers to your one question. The first has to do with just a reminder that this is an organizational and cultural assessment. So before they start, I mean, they're going to look at policies, but they're also going to have individual interviews with employees and community members, focus groups, and they'll be doing survey work to get a lay of the land for what's going on in the department, what is our culture in the police department, and what are the expectations of the community. So that's why you have the community aspect. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it actually is a nice transition into the next recommendation that the board made, and that had to do with the length of time between this initiation of an investigation and when it's closed and then when it comes to the board. We've taken that and gone broader because I've had ongoing discussions with this group over the last, probably 18 months at least, about the roles and responsibilities of the Citizen Review Board, and I think a desire to be able to do more than what is currently outlined in the ordinance. And so what is actually one of the items in the scope of services is to identify best practices to enhance the effectiveness of the Citizen Review Board. The district attorney, of course, and city attorney will be involved in this work as well because there are some legal implications on when information is allowed to be discussed in a case. But we're going to be relying pretty heavily on this group to come back and say, here's how, if you want to be a more robust Citizen Review Board, here are some things that we're seeing around the country that help increase your voice in policy making and in review of issues. So I think hopefully that addresses a piece of your concern.
Yeah, just one other thing, that you said there are 2 community reps that are working along with 2 elected officials that are kind of working with Jensen Hughes.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
What's the vetting process on the community rep? How are those people selected? Were they just randomly chosen, or did the community select them? I'm just curious.
Yes, they're the chairpersons of the 2 boards that touch this the most, and that is this board. That's how Jay was selected, and then Pastor Hughes, who is the chair of the Diversity, Inclusion, Civil Rights Board.
Okay, gotcha.
And as I understand the rule, it's also the mayor and city council member too. As I understand the role is we're not managing the process. We're just going to get a report and we're going to say, ask some questions. What else could you consider? What else should you do? And kind of just be a check-in point in the process, I think. I think that's
probably a little more active role when they start to come back with draft language and draft findings and recommendations, because at that point, I think again these two boards have been deeper into, and this board especially, deeper into this issue, and so Jay's role is to say, wait a minute, I'm not sure you're on the mark, or I think we're going to still have questions. This maybe doesn't go far enough, and so that's the voice in the room that will then push the consultant.
And the other thing that I think is going to happen, and I know that, some of the members here have asked me about it. I anticipate the Jensen Hughes people will interview us. I don't know exactly the process for it, but the proposal suggests that they're going to involve us as part of the data gathering as well. And my guess is it'll be done individually or in small groups. Just to facilitate that process, but I don't know the details.
Right, but assuming that process is going to reach more than those two community members, I'm assuming that there will be several perspectives.
Yeah,
throughout.
I don't think the role of the community members in this context is really to provide the community's perspective per se. I think it's more of a management and flow kind of process. The Jensen Hughes study, as I understand the proposal, is going to reach out and actually talk to members of the community and get that as part of their database. So the perspectives are supposed to come not from us, I think, but from outside groups.
Okay, that's what I was looking for.
Well, also, Kevin, I think this board and I can't remember the name of
Diversity, inclusion,
Diversity, inclusion, yeah, along DICRAB, I remember the name. We're kind of proxies for, the community members where we try to pull from different parts of the community. I mean, not perfect, but in some ways, we're here to represent the community as well. And again, that's tough. That's a challenge.
Gotcha. Thanks.
While we're on the topic, though, of this board and the ordinance, because I know in April, the ordinance for this board was revised a little bit, expanded the number of board members. But the city council then, April 4th or April 5th, said, yeah, we're going to approve this, but it needs more work. And I don't know if they've charged you with more work, because I know on improving the ordinance or changing it, or are we going to wait until we get the report back from the consultants?
Right.
So we'll wait.
I believe we should wait until we get the results back from the consultant.
Now, I didn't hear you mention, either one of you really, that this board, so is no one considering that this board would have investigative rights or investigative process?
That's all going to be part of the Jensen Hughes review. We're not asking them to limit what they're doing. We were asking them to come back and say, what's the state of the art with citizen review boards?
Right. Terrific. Thank you.
Number 7 has to do with the Brady Giglio issue, and I just wanted to say that we've included that task in terms of identification of behaviors and practices that would create possible Brady Giglio issues for police officers with appropriate training developed on this topic. It's an important one and can really limit the effectiveness of a police officer if they have that designation. Since you made your recommendation, though, there's also been a process change, and so now there are regular meetings that have been started by the police department with Mark Bennett and with a representative of our law department, as well as someone from the U.S. Attorney's Office, so they can review possible Brady Giglio violations or designations. And they're ultimately the ones that will determine that, because they have to determine what can go to court, as you know.
One of the deputy chiefs answered some questions about that when Mark Bennett came and addressed this board. And he said that there was no list, that he kind of knew what Brady Giglio, who should be excluded, but that there's no documented list. And then there's been others within the departments that there is a list. So I'm just curious about that. And I think, actually, you brought me a newspaper article, I'm pointing to Vincent here, that the prior chief said there was a list, a Brady Giglio list within the department. So I get a little nervous when I get conflicting stories like that.
I think a fair interpretation of what the district attorney said is that the district attorney is the person who's the keeper of that process.
Yeah.
I think the chief's getting ready to say something.
Oh, I apologize. I was just going to say exactly what you said, Jay, is that WPD does not have a list. We don't keep a list. All we do is we meet with the different law departments, and we go over current investigations, violations that may be possibly Brady Giglio, and then attorneys at that point to make that determination on what's disclosable to the courts at that time. And so we disclose our files and information over to the attorneys, and then they take it from there. But we do not have a list, and I have never seen one since I've taken over as interim chief.
Mark Bennett is the holder of a list of that information.
I'm sorry?
Mark Bennett is the one who holds that information.
Okay.
Right. I think the reason that this particular recommendation was put in the report is we recognize that Brady Giglio is a prosecution kind of issue. It's what the prosecuting attorney has to do. But what was really important was, and we talked about training, and the importance of the recommendation is that officers should understand that certain behaviors place themselves in jeopardy to being on a Brady Giglio kind of disclosure, which is not a good thing if you're an officer. And the thought process was, if the officers understand and they think before they do, so to speak, that certain behaviors might place themselves in career jeopardy because of a Brady Giglio issue, it would inform their behavior, and it would start the cultural change that would be appropriate. And so that is another way to approach this issue. Do you understand if you misbehave in this sort of way, you may not be the best suited police officer, because you might end up on a disclosure list maintained by the U.S. attorney or the district attorney, and that would affect your ability to serve as a police officer. That, I think, was part of the thought process of that recommendation.
And then the last item had to do with the disciplinary process and a review of that and the role that FOP has or has not played in that process. And that is included in the scope of services as well. A review of WPD's internal police discipline policies and recommendations for appropriate changes, which also addresses the FOP's involvement in administrative investigations and disciplinary outcomes. So that's our update to this point. As I mentioned, your recommendations were extremely important to us and help shape where we're going with Jensen Hughes. And it's, I think everybody's looking at trying to move forward and do, make sure that we're doing the best that we can from a police standpoint and a city standpoint. And I think not a person in the department that would disagree with that as our goal. Be glad to answer other questions that you have.
Any other questions?
Are we on target with what you expected?
Well, I'm disappointed. I mean, we'll be about a year out, from when this came to light to the public, right? Before we have anything back from the consultants.
Right.
I'm disappointed that we didn't hold, that this board didn't hold the police department accountable for the 60-day response. I I get the sense, and I'm afraid people in the community will have the sense, this just gets kicked down the road until there's some other horrible thing to focus on. Certainly, changing things culturally, that's huge. You know, perhaps I'm just not patient enough, but I think there are significant issues that were brought up when this was disclosed, even within leadership within the department. And I hate to see this continue on for another several months. And then, even when we get the report, right, 6 months from now, how long is it going to take, you know, for policies and things to be implemented? I think this needs more of an urgent or emergent kind of approach.
I think that, I mean, I understand it takes time and there's been frustration. Cultural change is something that occurs over time. And,
unless there's a leadership change. I mean,
well, but you need to, I think the Jensen Hughes tool, and that's
right.
what Jensen Hughes is, it's a tool. It is following the lead of our board's recommendations, and it is going to go out and talk to the community and to the officers and to all of the stakeholders and get an assessment of what is the situation, because we know part of it, we don't know all of it.
Right.
And we need to create a situation where we get buy-in from the rank and file police members, the police administration, the city manager's office, the political leadership, and the community. And I think a deliberate, thoughtful, and methodical approach helps create that information to get to a better result. Because you could say, well, you should do this or do that, but you have to have buy-in. And I'm hopeful that a process like this gets the buy-in for substantial change and appropriate change. That's my thought process. So you could say people are frustrated about delay, but I'm hopeful. I think this is a very positive thing for the community, and we can build off of it.
Well, I'd rather it be thorough and well done than just, we got time, we got to do quick. Quick don't get it if you do not do a thorough and intensive and study. And that's what this is. This is a study. This is, you can call it whatever you want, but they're going to come in, they're going to study, they're going to see what's right, what's wrong, what's happened. And you have to do that with patience and thoroughness, and they have to have time to do it. And I would rather have that than have it rushed, and then about 3 years down the road, somebody go, who did this? This is terrible. Well, that's because they weren't given enough time to do it thoroughly. And so I would rather have that. Yes, I'd like it to be faster too, believe me. But I think in the end, if we come out with a good report, now if at the end nobody feels they did a good job, then that's different, but that's a whole different story. But I think they need to have the ability, the patience from everybody to do a thorough job. And that's what I'm hoping, is that it's going to be thorough. It's going to have the pros, the cons, the pluses, the minuses, and how we can improve.
I'm not sure, Bob, if how transparent the process will be to the community about the engagement with the consultant, but my advice would be is to find ways to inform the community about what's happening, and then the consultants offer opportunities. My sense is they're not from here, so they're going to have to do some work to figure out who to talk to, right? But maybe finding ways that, this board, other boards, and community members can help kind of spread the message of what's actually happening. Not everybody's going to be able to participate, but I think if there's some transparency of this happened and some potential opportunities for people to weigh in, I might suggest that this board find a way to communicate this to the community as well about what we know about the process. That might help alleviate some concerns about feeling included, or they talked to those folks, but they didn't talk to the real people they needed to talk to. And just to mitigate some of that might be helpful, because what can happen at times, a report just pops up and people think, well, where did that come from? Who engaged in that, and their skepticism on it. So I trust that, we can maybe help with that too.
Sean, that's great. Well, the monthly reports will be public.
Okay.
And we can get those to you for distribution. Any way we can get the word out is always helpful, right? Additional ways. And then I'll take to heart as they're looking for people to interview and, including focus groups, we'll reach out to this group and others for ideas.
Right, and you might, I think available, I know I shared it with Twyla and I shared it with Denny, I think. Their proposal, including their description of their methodology, is available.
Okay.
And it's pretty thorough.
Where's it at? Where can we find it?
I can email it to you.
Okay.
I don't know what city manager's office has it. It's around.
Okay.
I like it too. Would the reports from maybe Louisville or Minneapolis be available that they've done as well?
I would assume so. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe
Sure.
we can look for them and see if
Yeah, probably try to find us. And you may have already addressed, I might have missed it, but I'm assuming that this report would have recommended consequences and disciplinary action, possibly, or no? Is that not?
Probably not.
Probably not. Okay.
Not for the past incidents, if that's what you're asking.
I mean, I'm talking about going forward for similar incidents with.
Oh, under the discipline discussion, they may, I don't know what that'll look like yet, right? So they may come back and say, we recommend you look at a different disciplinary schedule or matrix or something. I have no idea.
And the reason I asked, and I'll tell you what my concern or my fear is, I want to be optimistic, but I would be lying if I didn't say I had some concerns. My concern is I'm confident that this report, if it's done thoroughly, is going to reveal some bias and some disparity, and a lot of those are going to be based off of race as well as some other things. And I could be wrong, but I would bet almost my soul on that. And so with that said, it kind of takes me back to a conversation with Doug Nolte, who was a high-ranking officer. I think he was deputy chief. He and I went to school together, and we had a 2-hour conversation one day, and he looked me dead in the eyes, and he said, when I went to school with you at Robinson, I didn't see us as black and white. I just saw us as friends. And he said, I'm embarrassed to tell you this, but on the police department, when I pulled over black people and I pulled over white people, they were different stops. He said, if I pulled over a white person, I would write a ticket. When I pulled over a black person, I was looking for crack in those cars. Now, this is what he told me. He was the deputy chief, I believe, at one point in time. Doug Nolte. Was he? I think he was hired in captain, wasn't he?
I remember the name.
Okay, captain. Okay, still too high to make that statement. and so, and the thing is, that reveals a cultural issue. That reveals somebody that went into the force not thinking that way, and someone whose mindset changed over time. Those are deep-rooted cultural issues that don't change regardless of how much training that you do. Those things are changed from consequences and changes in leadership. And I'm just hoping that this report has those type of recommendations and that they're taken to heart. So I thought I'd share that.
Kevin, I'm really intrigued about the reports too about Louisville and Minneapolis. I was intrigued, like what did they look like, and also how did those departments utilize them or not? So I'm curious. If I find anything out, I'll share it with Jay.
Okay.
Share it with you.
Well, I've served on task force and been appointed to things, and they've had consultants come in over the years. I won't tell you how many years, but over the years. And my guess is, from what I and anybody else could see, they looked at a couple of things, yeah, we like that, and the rest of it went in the file cabinet, and it sat there. So I'm hoping that this report will be used for what we're doing. That they don't go, well, we don't like that, and this is good, well, okay, and then that's it, and that's the last we see, and we pay these people a lot of money for stuff that half the time we blow off because we don't like what they said, or we don't see it as feasible, or whatever the reason. But so I'm hoping that this report is a used report, that it's worth the money, worth the effort, and that it is used, for what we're going for.
Sharon, I see that as part of our role too.
Yes.
If we don't agree with the way that it's being implemented or considered, we make that known to the public. We have the right to do that now under the new ordinance. that we can make public reports on things, and we say,
We actually could make a public report on that before the ordinance.
that's true.
The ordinance just allowed us to make reports on discipline cases.
Right.
That was the new addition.
Yeah, a report is not a magic bullet to solve. I mean, it can't solve culture. I mean, it's going to be one tool that we have to begin to do that. But yeah, it doesn't solve. It's not going to solve everything.
I hope that the proof, yeah. I'm sorry.
So I just hope there's some accountability. That's the piece that I'm hoping. You know, we can get these reports. That'd be great. We'll talk about it. But where does the accountability? Where does it go? And you know, Paul was talking about, well, maybe this is what we can do. But I just want there to be accountability.
So it's not in the drawer.
So it's not in the drawer. Absolutely. I mean, you know, dust it off. Say, okay, that worked for then, and everything like that. But culture is a thing that it's not going to change overnight. This is about identifying a culture, identifying what's going on. And if we identify this culture and we identify what's going on, is this okay for Wichita?
Right.
That's right.
Well, and then,
I think these memes revealed a small portion of what's going on. I think there's other stuff probably that makes that look like it's, I don't know. There's probably some other stuff out there.
and then we have the wrinkle. And Chief Moore, I was really sorry to hear that you were retiring. But good luck on your retirement. But we have the wrinkle of a new chief coming in somewhere in this process, right? That, I don't even know how those things all try to fit together. I mean, how do you hire somebody when all this is going on? They don't know what they're getting into. We don't know their commitment, you know, to adhering to the report and implementing everything there. This is kind of a crapshoot, I feel like, without continued leadership. It's mess after mess here to clean up.
I just don't think it relies only on leadership. I think it's throughout the organization. And I think, you know, I mean, we can always wait around for the perfect chief. Sorry, Chief Moore, you're too young to retire, but, you know, it's just, I don't know if that matters. Like, there has to be a culture of accountability and a culture of us looking at this continuously, because it doesn't matter who's at the top. I mean, that's just one way to look at it. And, you know, that person can leave, and then we have to start all over again. Nobody's going to stay forever. So, I mean, I appreciate that. I just think you can't put all of the energy into who's at the top, because that won't be sustainable.
Well, the culture, you know, human nature, everybody that's born has human nature. It doesn't change. I don't think the only one guy was born perfect, in my opinion. So human nature doesn't change. But what we try to do is have a culture that is a positive and good culture. And I agree, you can't change people with rules and laws, what's deep inside, but you can have a culture and you can have people have enough caring and passion for whatever they're doing that they try to do the right thing. So that's what we're after, I think.
Well, and Chief, while we still have you, so so we have this this big report that's coming, but I don't want our board to feel like, you know, we're handcuffed and unable to get data that we want. You know, my focus is data. Is there a problem? Let's look at the data. You know, I've made some requests, and I think the captain here is going to get it for us, and I'm excited about that. But I don't want our request to say, no, let's just wait. I don't want things to be stalled, waiting on this report. And I don't know if you can commit.
I can't commit, because I can appreciate your, you know, data does prove a lot. However, as you know, we're 50 officers down. We're still in the process. Everyone in every organization is limited on the personnel they have. And our number one goal is protecting the citizens. And so we can get the data for you. However, I don't want to pull people from records to go and start pulling data that are working on police reports that need to go to the citizens and doing backgrounds that will assist with investigations. So yeah, I've heard about the request for data, and definitely we will accommodate and get that information. However, time-wise, it may not be as quick as you'd like, just because of the fact of unless you want me to pull people from really critical areas to work with data, I believe that I have to focus on the number one goal, which is protecting the people.
Well, on the topic then of data, because that was another thing I wanted to bring up since you're both here. So the budget was just passed, right? And so two things on there. We talk a lot about the issues that the department has with folks who are having a mental health crisis. And I understand there's some money in the budget. Is it for the department? For mental health workers or something within the police department?
Right, yes, we're trying to embed social workers. As a result of an incident involving C.J. Lofton, as you know, there weren't social workers available that we could actually have on scene, or from St. Francis that we could have utilized in that instance. And so to prevent that and reduce that from happening in the future and dealing with juveniles, adults, people that are in a mental health crisis, and to take the officer out of the fold of that call that's going on, the officers are going to be able to call our social workers and have them come to the scene so they can step back, still be there for support if by chance the person can't contain themselves. However, they should be able to walk that individual through either being able to stay home or taken to ComCare or to a local hospital to be seen. But we'll have that actual individual within our police department to be able to provide that necessary guidance that officers don't have the ability to do.
How many?
Yeah, $700,000, and I believe it's 9 professional positions, if I remember correctly.
That was my next question.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And then within the budget too, because we heard from Keeley before, and that the systems don't talk well together. It's a really manual process to get some of the data we want, right? And so I don't know, did you have any money in the budget to kind of, I don't know if it's an upgrade, I don't know if it's an interface, but so that it's just not such a manually intensive process, that we can get what we need without the drain on your human resources.
Hey, Chief, you want me to speak to that a little bit? Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
So, Father, and part of what I'll cover when I go through the staff report is a little bit of the changes that I tried to make to do some of the tracking that you have asked for, to kind of make it more user-friendly for me so I can help explain it to you and we can go through things together. Part of what you got in the report, unlike with the allegations, directive types, I think it will help explain to you what we're looking at. We're breaking things down and understanding there's general headlines that we go through every month, but these are how they're broken down a little bit more. And I've tried to make it so that we can pull this data and not ourselves here, that we can pull it easier, quicker. So if there is something different that we want to look at, we can try to. But I try to keep the format and the graph formats and things kind of similar to what you're used to seeing. When I go to my staff report here in a little bit, I'll try to go through all this, explain it to you, and then we can kind of go from there and see where we want to start working with what we want to do.
And that leads me to the question, are we concluded with questions for the chief and the city manager on their presentation? Because if we are, we can then go to the staff report and address these other issues.
I have one final question, Jay. Sean made reference to real change and real progress comes when there's universal embracing by the entire organization. And we've talked about the department itself. We talked about the FOP. There's a third player in this whole process of discipline, and that's the city's HR department. And I'd just like to hear how Jensen Hughes will be interacting with HR in making its assessment.
They'll be an integral part of it. They're actually identified in another scope, a piece where I mentioned this earlier, where HR law, city manager's office, and how they interface with the police department, it will be reviewed, and they'll talk about specifically on disciplinary issues and personnel issues, but they'll just look at that general relationship and the oversight that's provided in that relationship.
Both in the past and lessons learned as well as going forward?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Anything else?
Bringing up to deputy chiefs, or maybe I'm just now bringing it up. So the press conference, you two did a press conference, I don't remember the day, and I was a little frustrated when those in the press asked about consequences for the deputy chiefs. And my frustration was specific to this. When it came to consequences for those who were doing the text messages, there was a lot of transparency, right? But then when it came to the discussion around the deputy chiefs, it was, well, it's an HR matter and it's not going to be discussed. That's frustrating. And we get to know what happened to one group, but we don't know what happened or anything, if anything happened, because I think there's some real culpability there. That something that I think is pretty egregious was, it feels like attempted to be hidden or just not addressed for something that was as horrible as it was. You can't have it both ways. Being transparent and then hiding, it's an HR issue. In my opinion, we shouldn't have to deal with it both ways.
Okay, anything else? All right, let's close. Thank you. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Bob.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Drive safely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's move.
Don't get pulled over.
Let's move to the staff report. Captain Easter.
I'm going to go back to that point. I mean, they're gone, but as a board, can't we be a little more forceful about that? I mean, is everybody comfortable that we know what happened to the officers, but we have no idea if there were consequences whatsoever?
I wasn't comfortable that it wasn't addressed when you mentioned it, since you brought it up, because I didn't think it was an open-end response. I thought it was one that warranted some feedback, but I don't know if anybody else feels the same way.
Well, that's why I looked at you. I thought, well, I guess maybe because it wasn't worded as a question, then it was just a public statement you were making. I don't know.
I thought it was.
Because that might be feedback for us. Like if we ask it in a question form, that might be better approach than making an interpretation.
Yeah, that's a good
I was trying
point.
to figure out why nobody responded.
Yeah.
The question would be, what happened?
Yeah.
The question would be, what happened with the deputy chiefs? Were they just slapped on the hand, or was anything said? What was done? Is that our business? I mean, can we legally find out? I'm not saying I don't want to know. I'm just saying, is that something we can legally find out? But that's the question. Mm-hmm. It wasn't transparent. What happened? Okay. Now, do we get an answer? If you don't get an answer, then it's not transparent. Not too hard to figure out.
Thanks for the pointers. I'm not accustomed to dealing with politicians, so I'm learning.
I was just trying to figure out if that's why. I don't know if that's.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Okay.
You don't have the answer there?
I do not. And I don't know, so I can tell you that. So you all it was a little late and closer to our meeting than what I wanted, but it just honestly took us a while to get through this and try to come up with a product I think will ultimately be okay for us.
I like it.
One thing that you are still going to get on a monthly basis will be the finished complaint summaries from the month prior. So that didn't go anywhere, didn't change at all. It's still the exact same form that you got. something that now I've added since I went back through, and I've done my best to go back through, try to start to really understand ordinance that was changed and make sure that I'm up to date with it. But your look back, I know goes back to up to 5 years, right? It seems like with not knowing what you might have been looking at for the last several years, I did go back and at least go for 2 years on this initial report that I gave you on the finalized complaints. Jay, like we've talked about in the past, we color-coded it to try to make it easier for you to see things that you might want to pick out, want to keep track of, and then now it is tracked. So things like officer-involved shootings will be in red. In the yellow, conduct unbecoming, and we kept it to, you will see through here on some of the yellows, there might be a B or something, violation that's in there, but it's because there was a D, C, D, E, or F that was involved with it. Sorry about that. So we kept the conduct unbecomings to the C through F type violations. And when you look at that directive sheet we gave you, those are the ones that I believe you kind of focused in on. These are the things we want to know about. Because good judgment falls under conduct unbecoming. But those Bs aren't nearly as important to look at as the Cs, Ds, Es, Fs, where there are could be egregious violations. So we kept it through there, and it's color-coded. And then green are going to be any excessive or unnecessary force investigations that were done. Once again, doesn't mean that that was the outcome when you look at the, when it's chosen. That doesn't mean that's what the outcome was if we were to review that case. But you see what the allegation was, at least. So we have those color-coded sheets now that go back 2 years, and we'll try to keep that updated in the same way. Like I said, you've been given that allegation and directive sheet. If you have questions about it, just understand that when you're looking at allegations on these main sheets, it will be that main highlighted general category.
Is it?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Is it in our attachment? This
Yeah, you should have got
allegations?
it within the packet.
4 pages, ma'am.
I'm sorry?
About 4 pages.
4 pages in. Terrific. Thanks.
And so within each one of those category types, then you're going to have multiple specific regulations. And so I'm hoping that helps us all kind of see what's finalized, see what can be reviewed, and color code them for you to help that out. Here, I'll just give you one you can look at.
Sorry.
But that's what I'm describing.
Terrific. Thanks.
When we go back to then the monthly reports that I typically go over, and you talked about how, Carla, I think you had mentioned that it's, typically the same 3 or 4 violations that are always at the top. Well, there's really nothing that's going to change that other than if those change.
Right.
What we did do is, and I even have some of the definitions of them if you have more questions on what we did. But let me run through my graphs like I normally do on those pages for month to date, year to date, and then if there's questions, I can go back through some of the specific allegation types.
So my question is, do you guys find any of this, first of all, I don't know how long it takes you to do the graphs. And do you guys really enjoy the graphs? Do you feel like it's worth whatever time you or your staff has to do? Are any of these graphs really actionable?
That's a board question.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how long it takes you to do that.
I don't do them. Keely has done them. Michelle will be doing them now. I can't. They're not a 5-minute thing. I don't know that they're multiple day intensive either.
They don't give us insight as to which particular case to pull. They don't do that. They do help tell you that, they give you an idea of race and gender of the officers. They tell you where what patrol bureau is involved. So this gives you an understanding, are these evenly distributed through the department, or is there an area that's more concentrated or not? I think that's generally helpful information. The nature of the individual violations, so you know that you've got conduct unbecoming versus safety and things like that. I think that gives you a decent feel for what's out there. I think that's helpful.
And that, it's up to you as a board. I mean, to be honest with you, anything that you don't ask for isn't something we have to do, correct? I mean, it's something we don't have to spend time on, but we're willing to try to get you what you want to see also.
I mean,
It's kind of a how you.
I think it's important to know the number of external versus internal, and it does that. So the question I have, at least from an administrative standpoint, resources, is this I'm hoping this is an hour job, not a 10-hour.
This is something that can be continued without much issue.
Okay.
And so this can do, now, if you'd like me to run through it differently, I don't know how to really, because I just kind of hit, as we go through it, hit what the numbers are. If there's something different you'd like to see, but that's what I'm hoping when you see these other sheets and go through them, it'll give you a little bit better time to where you're saying we have to look through pages with not knowing. It wasn't contradicting, but there was some of the same information on multiple sheets that didn't really answer, is this something to even be reviewed or not? Now everything within here is something that's under your purview, is kind of where I went with it. We can keep going like this for a couple months. If there's changes that start to think about, let me know, and we'll look at what makes sense.
Let me ask on the gender and race of officers. So these are folks with complaints in this period of a month, right?
They're finalized.
The 79 of them.
Yeah.
Finalized complaints from the 1st through the 31st of July. That is the gender and race of officers involved.
Okay, so, you said 79, you added it up, Dennis? Thank you. And then, so that 79 is, well, I think for context, what I'm trying to say, for context then, it would be helpful, I think, for us to know then of the department, what percentage are white males and what percentage are Polynesian and
Yes, I have
Hispanic?
the numbers here.
Oh, the percentage?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Somewhere else?
I have the numbers. They're not all, I can tell you specific numbers, they're not all broken down by percentage. And this is something that isn't just, same thing, it's not, number one, it changes day to day. But I have fairly recent numbers on all of that because I thought you might want to know that.
Yeah.
I can run through those while we're here. You don't have it on this sheet right here, but I do have the numbers if you have a question. When it says on here 48 white males,
right.
Gender, so of the demographics, and this is within the police department, not necessarily commissioned officers.
Okay.
There's 72% males, 478 white males.
Okay, 478 white men?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I mean, rather, yeah.
Do you want me to run through everyone? I can.
Yeah, I mean, we can, or even just going forward, if you can, throw the percentages in there for us.
I can look at something adding to this that makes it show you an overall, I guess, percentage where it's at. I can look at trying to put something in there. These numbers for the department, I just was able to track these down yesterday.
So, well, maybe then just real quickly, how many white females? What percentage roughly?
189.
189. And that would, so they're less than 25% of the department. No, total number of people in the department. So 25% of the complaints are against white females. It seems disproportionate. Without having exact numbers, and it's just kind of, I'm guessing.
These are not total complaints, these are finalized complaints.
Right. But I mean, it doesn't get finalized if it's not made, right? Yeah.
True, but some of them take longer than others to get finalized, and
And
1 month can be skewed over.
because that graph, unless I'm missing it, is not on the year-to-date, January to July, right?
No,
It's
because
just for
they had to go back and manually
Sure.
pull that for this.
Okay.
And like I said, I didn't have these numbers
Sure.
to do that. But they're ultimately, with how they change, we can get something that's fairly close, I would say. We'll have to look at it and see what I can do. Do you want me to, and I can do this, everybody seems to be kind of looking as we're going along. If you want me to run through these sheets like I normally do, or has everybody looked at it? It's kind of up to you how you want to go.
The graphs?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think we're good.
okay.
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah.
Good to go.
I can read.
Are there any cases that, on the individual case sheet listing, the finalized cases for the last month, are there any cases anybody want to pull?
Yeah, I think the 22 PSB 3395. Is that one that, I was thinking about the one that you force?
3395?
Yeah. Towards the bottom, there's two.
$22 PSB 3395?
Yeah.
Okay.
The use of force complaint.
Yeah, 3395 and then 3398 right underneath it. Not to say we only want ones with video, but I'd be curious if one of them did have video, if we would be able to, that might be a,
The rude conduct,
yeah. Well,
33.
yeah. Yeah, I was looking at both of them.
So Kevin, one of the things that we've had a little discussion around is there a way where we can maybe cast a wider net and look at more of these rather than just, a couple of them per month? We haven't really settled on anything yet because there can be there's the potential, to speak to one of your concerns that there's some potential of something that could be pretty serious that looks pretty benign, in the description. And without being able to cast a wider net, we're not able to find them. But we haven't settled on anything.
No, and I mean, one way to do this, one way to is absolutely, it's now available on the website, I take it, but if a citizen wants us to review a complaint, that we can absolutely flag it and do it, and that's a way to get more complaints reviewed. But the citizen somebody has to tell us about the complaint they want reviewed. Apparently, Vincent reported a problem with the email on the CRB members.
Yeah, there is a help ticket in with the IT department.
It's fixed now? All right. Vincent gets
Thanks,
credit.
Vincent, yeah.
We had, some of you may know, apparently there's an email address where you can write the board. And apparently Vincent discovered last week or sometime that when you write it, he discovers he's unauthorized. Apparently it was linked to some group or something within, and anyway, the email wasn't going through. Anyway, apparently it's been fixed. Any other cases?
So I'm curious, some of these, they become unfounded, but then there's no camera, or usually like if it was unfounded or exonerated, it'll state that because of Axon, right? And there's actually just here in July, there's 4 instances where the officer was coached or mentored for not activating their camera. That seems like a lot if it's supposed to be everybody's habit. And it's hard to know, is it the same person that's not doing it, not activating their camera? But it's just curious how some of these can be settled, but we don't know if how you settled it without camera.
I guess I would say 4 is very minuscule, considering 600 officers, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, turning them on. how many times per 10-hour shift. There's only 4 instances that didn't happen.
Well, there's only 4 that are reported, and I don't know how you would catch all the others.
Well, there's multiple ways. I get what you're
Okay,
saying.
yeah.
I mean, to say that is a large number,
Okay.
I wouldn't say. I mean, when you think about the scheme of how many people are turning them off and on, in and out of a car, on calls, that means somebody reviewed it, right? Or there was a complaint involved with it, and it didn't happen. Sometimes it's, there's self-reporting at certain times on things like that, where an officer says, hey, I don't want to get in trouble. I want you to know I forgot to do this.
Well, a lot of these where the entries are shown, they don't mention the camera, but most of these are on Axon, I would assume.
Yeah, I mean, almost all of these should be somewhere, right? Should have something to do with it. And unfounded means that was just what the determination was.
Right.
And so that it doesn't necessarily mean, some of them would say cleared by Axon, but that's
Right.
because somebody defined that in there. And I saw that it said cleared by Axon.
Okay.
And unfounded just means that it was unfounded.
Right.
So it doesn't always mean that there was cleared by video.
Anything else? All right. It is 5:35. We have 2 other cases set for review. Before we set those, Captain, do you have an estimate of how long it would take to review these cases?
It would probably take 30 minutes.
All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and see if we can review both of them then? I didn't know if somebody wanted to move one off into the next month or not. Everybody.
There's not much video, not long video, so depending on questions,
Let's go
it
ahead.
might be quicker than that.
Do this. Let's go till 6 p.m. So I move the Citizen Review Board recess into executive session for 25 minutes to receive information regarding reports from the Wichita Police Department pursuant to KSA 754913B1 to discuss personnel matters of non-elected personnel and to protect the privacy interests of identifiable individuals. This executive session will begin now at 5:35 and will end at 6 p.m. And the meeting will then resume in the first floor. Is there a second to the motion? Second. All in favor, say aye.
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 What I wanted to address was a couple of things real quick. Number one, your intervention, is that limited to just text messaging and communications, or does that apply to officers on the street also?
We have the ability to review any kind of case as a PSB case as a matter of policy. We have the ability then just to make policy recommendations on anything police department related. So if it's a personnel matter related to a PSB case, then we can look at closed cases. And no, we do a lot of cases way beyond the text messaging. That was just one example.
Okay, well, the reason I asked the question is because I also think there's a need for intervention when officers on the street. And a case in point is, I'm sure most of us have seen the situation in, I believe it was Arkansas here within the last 10 days.
Right.
Okay. So there was 3 officers there. Not a single one of those officers offered to intervene in what was certainly improper conduct. Okay. So I'm saying, does your ordinance, does it provide for that type of intervention?
Our ordinance, if that occurred here in Wichita, that would be a violation of policy. Our board could review that violation of policy after the PSB investigation was done. We can review the individual cases after the PSB the Professional Standards Bureau investigation was done.
But what does your policy state as far as, is that required?
We have.
Is it recommended, or is it?
If a citizen would ask us to review it, I'm sure we would, but we review cases as a matter of discretion. So we obviously can't review all the cases. Something like that we would absolutely review. I know we would, but we pick the cases that we review.
Okay, let me move on to my next one real quickly. We talked about, or you all talked about the how do you determine who's who's a hate group or a terrorist group, whatever. And I don't know about the FBI. I don't know what they have, in their data. But I would suggest, and this is just a suggestion, that you all contact or collaborate with the Southern Poverty Law Center. That is the best group that I know of in this country in following hate groups.
I agree. I'm familiar with it, yes.
Okay. Now, my third issue, real quickly, is Brady Iglo. And I think that there's a misunderstanding on the part of some of you. I was surprised to hear the interim chief say that in his tenure, he's not been able to access any data on Brady Iglo. And I heard you say that it's a prosecutor's issue. Well, that's partly true. The first part of that is the person that should be most informed about Brady Iglo is your personnel director, because that is the person that makes the decision who to hire and who not to hire. And Brady Iglo does not start when somebody becomes an officer. It starts before that. They go into their background, all the way to when they were teenagers, okay? So your personnel director is the one that should have access to that information.
Right. And I will tell you that historically, a long time ago, the police department did have a policy that monitored that situation. And then at some point, that policy was changed to the current policy as a result of what apparently was an FOP arbitration, although I don't know all the details, and that was a long time ago. And so now the district attorney is the keeper of the list.
Okay.
So that's what
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll go to executive session now.
add it to my collection.
Yeah, I gotta watch them.
Turn it out there.
I don't see anybody out there.
All right. The board is now going back into public session. As a result of the review and the limited time, the board is going to continue the review of the two pending cases to the next meeting at another executive session so that we'll have time to reach new business. So the next item on the agenda will be new business. Is there any new business?
Yes. One of our recommendations in the case that we just reviewed with the city manager was combined efforts to restore public confidence or to further public confidence in both the department and ourselves as a review body. And I'd just like to urge my fellow board members to do all that they can personally to make the public aware of our role and how the public can interact with it. Just personally, I took the effort and made it an appearance at our district advisory board. Was granted time on the agenda, although it was limited because they had a lot of zoning issues to take care of. But take those opportunities to remind the public that we do sit in review of the police department, its discipline and its actions, and that they have recourse if they have questions, and that is to come to us. And then I also had one other question of the department, if you want to continue with new business. We spent a very large amount of time on the exchange of messages and images through social media, and it was needed. I mean, we had grievous actions and violations of policy. There's another case involving police law enforcement on the West Coast. You may have followed it with the Kobe Bryant crash site investigation, where law enforcement officers were exchanging photographs of the crash site and, unfortunately, the victims. And I just wanted to ask the department if there is a policy addressing that here in Wichita, because it did seem to be a violation of privacy.
I would have to look to find what you're referencing, but I would assume it would fall under our evidence policy and releasing any type of photographs or evidence from a scene that's not public consumption. Between now and next meeting, I'll see if I can find what policy addresses it.
The case I'm referencing was a civil action, and it was the supposition or the plaintiff's position was that the photographs that were taken were not essential to investigation. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, so I didn't have all the details last month about some of the follow-up items, from prior board meetings. So February of 2021, the board made a motion, it was approved to get the CRB to get a citation data analysis quarterly. And so, since the board approved that, I guess we would want the department to go ahead and start providing that. It's in the February 2021 minutes.
Yeah, that's right. We did make that request. I think we then subsequently got distracted by a lot of controversy, but yeah, there was a request for that citation data.
And I think he had some specifics, so it's in the February 2021 minutes. And it's probably in this little summary, isn't it, of motions and so forth? Approve the resolution presented by Walt Chappell, motion by Sims, Harris, second, and then motion passed. So I guess the details aren't there, but you'll be able to find it. And then February 2022, and I brought it up, and you had great points, Jay, on Lance Aldridge, because it's gone on to litigation or whatever. It's not within the purview of this board, but there was concern that there was no, and actually, Sharon, I remember, it was kind of your concern. There's no written policy that findings for internal complaints are not disclosed. And whoever presented the case that day or was talking to the board, the response was, that's just the way it's been done. So I don't know if you guys remember the Lance Aldridge. But he filed a complaint and could never get an answer of how it was resolved. Or he would get answers, it's opened, it's closed, it's opened, it's closed. And so do we want to change this? If there's no written policy, or make a recommendation, if there's no written policy that findings for internal complaints are not disclosed, should be or should not be, should the department develop a policy? If I was going to make a complaint, I would want to know, how it was resolved.
That's a personal frustration that I've been through, so I'd like to see something like that too.
The policy for the department, I believe anyway, is if it's an external complaint, they do let you know about the resolution, and the issue is on the internal.
Internal, right.
We could put it on the agenda, a proposed policy recommendation, or consideration of a proposed policy recommendation, and make it an agenda item and have a discussion, and make a recommendation if the board feels appropriate. We can absolutely do that.
Okay. This was the big one, and I looked at it a little more. And so when we talk about these investigations, May of 2021, so at that time, granted it was a year ago, the investigative process varied from bureau to bureau. At that time, WPD was working to standardize investigative processes for external complaints. And when they had that standardized process, it was going to be presented to the CRB for feedback. And that never happened. And then it was noted, and all this I took from the minutes, right? It was noted that internal and external complaints are handled through the same process, but professional standards does not make recommendations on closing complaints. Command staff has a responsibility. But I think it was Captain Nicholson said that there's not a lot of consistency from bureau to bureau. And the purpose of kind of getting the standardized process was to hold the department accountable. Has it been done? I guess I'm asking you all, is there a standardized process then that's implemented and adhered to from bureau to bureau for investigations?
I guess my thought would be that there always has been. So I'm not sure where he was saying there isn't more, but because I don't know what you mean by a standardized process. Like
a written policy on how it's handled.
Yeah, that I don't know. I know how we do them, but I don't know what the policy actually is. Let me look at that. I'll look at the minutes from that as well, see what the context is, and try to come up with something.
Well, yeah, because they were supposed to bring this to the CRB.
I'll look for it.
I don't know about anybody else, but that's a little concerning. I mean, every organization kind of has their policies on how things are handled. And for something that's so important to the public, if it's inconsistent.
I believe there probably is. I don't
know. Okay. I don't know why.
Also.
Pardon?
It's something that's frequent enough also that there should be consistency, a policy for that consistency.
Yeah.
Captain, why don't you check the minutes and kind of make a survey, and then at the staff meeting, or there's a separate item next meeting, you can give us a response about, is there an administrative guideline or a policy that relates to how this process is handled at the bureau level? I think that's your question.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I was reading something else, but then we would look at it, right? We would review that.
Right, he would tell us so we know whether there's an issue or not.
Yeah. Okay. And in June, we were talking about policy 409, vehicle and pedestrian stops. I think Walt Chappell made a motion, but I don't think it passed. But Reichenberger said all policies are to be reviewed annually. And if all policies are reviewed annually, and the board is supposed to be looking at all of those where there's departmental or officer and citizen interaction, I don't know that you guys have had many policies to review. I mean, there haven't been that many, I mean, in the last year that I've been
Annually. There are some of them that come up annually, and some of them, they have a regular schedule.
Okay, well, I just took as it was, because he said all policies are to be reviewed annually. That's what Reichenberger
They're
said.
reviewed on it. Each policy, if you go, has a review date on it, so when you go and look, it'll tell you how often they're reviewed. And I can't say that we do it every time, but Captain Easter or Captain Nicholson before
Every 2 years.
would send an email, and then I would send an email on that would say, these policies are up for review. If anybody in the board wants to pull those policies for review, let me know. And of course, most of them are very routine.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. No, I get it. But it's just like if
Early in the board's history, we used to review a lot more policies
Than we have.
than we have recently. We were just curious, we wanted to know more, and now that we have new members, maybe we want to revisit those.
Yeah.
That wouldn't hurt.
Any member can, for Kevin particularly, on the police department website, the policy and procedural manual is actually posted. And so it's a lot of pages, but if there's a policy that anybody has a concern about, you can go read it and say, hey, I have a question or concern, and then we can address it.
And all I do, I mean, it's just what we're told, right? And so if we were told, incorrectly, then that's good. But, so you'll get back to us, Easter?
So when I get a notification that policies are under review, I send that to Mr. Fowler. Or when I get a notification that these policies have been reviewed and are up for published or are published, then I send that.
And I will tell you that I probably haven't sent all of those along, but about a month ago, for example, I sent one and I had a cut and paste in there
I remember getting it.
with like 5 or 6 policies that were up for review. That's my intent, is to get them out.
Okay.
And they tend to come in groups like that, maybe 5 to 6 at a time. And it's not necessarily a month. It just kind of depends. But as I get them, then that's how I forward them.
Yeah, because I've got 2 or 3 at home that you sent out, and I said I wanted to look at, and I did, and I didn't have any suggestions at the time, but.
I'm not saying we should. I'm just trying to get clarity. And then July of 2021, Policy 605, Emergency Vehicle Operations. And then the 2020 data, so this was July, so in the 2020 data, there were a total of 461, it was reported like in the minutes, 461 chases, I guess, or emergency vehicle operations. So when you think about it, that's just more than 1 per day. I didn't know it was that many, and I think I brought it up last week. I mean, as this board, should we know, like in a monthly time frame, like how many high-speed chases or just chases there are? You'll hear me say it probably all the time, but people pay attention to what's measured, and if folks know that we're looking at that. At the Citizens Police Academy on Tuesday night, the sheriff said if they're doing a chase, they'll call WPD to help with it, and WPD will call them sometimes. So then we have multiple agencies and chases. And I think it's a good thing just to monitor, if nothing else, like how many there are per month. A member of the public asked that the board recommend the policy be changed to forbid pursuits on nonviolent offenses. And then Fowler said the board would consider making that recommendation, but we weren't prepared to make the recommendation at that time. And so I don't know if it ever came up again. I don't remember that it did. So just another thing if we want to look at it. But I am personally concerned about the number of chases when there's an average of more than 1 per day. I didn't know it was that many.
You have to look at what that means. And it depends what your definition is, and I don't know what.
That's what I want to know.
If your definition is emergency vehicle operations, that would be any time that somebody activates their license siren, right?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking.
That number seems extremely high to me.
It's in the minutes, and it came from, We have it right here. 461 total pursuits. 284 were initiated for traffic violations, 11 for suspicious characters, 26 for suspect other, 82 were for stolen vehicles, 5 were for robbery suspects, 4 were for assisting other agencies, 13 were for domestic violence suspects, 4 were burglary suspects, 2 were homicide suspects, 28 were for unknown reasons. This was 2020 data, because we got it in July of 2021.
Well, and what do they consider a chase? You know, I'm going down Kellogg and I'm speeding, and the cop comes up behind me. I don't stop immediately till I have a place where I can pull over, so he has to follow me, or he's still chasing me, but eventually I'm pulling over. Is that part of her statistics?
That wouldn't be classified
As a pursuit.
Okay, that's.
But if we attempt to pull over a vehicle for whatever reason, the vehicle takes off, the officer now has to pull a case number that's classified as a pursuit. Even though you didn't chase them, they just took off on you. Now to be called in that way, that has to be documented that way.
Okay. That's what I wanted to know too.
I've got very few cases over the last 22 years. Very few went more than 10 to 15 seconds. Because you work in a populated area, so you have to weigh the risk over the reward risk. So, but it is classified as a chasing, so you didn't get up to speed or anything. So
We have reviewed the chase policy in detail on 2 separate occasions during the history of the board, and I think ultimately came to the conclusion that, as Sergeant Kimball said, the WPD typically calls off the chases, that they typically do not pursue, unlike some other agencies perhaps. And we never have figured out a way to change a policy that would make it better. I mean, given the practice that the WPD follows.
And I'm not advocating that we change the policy. I mean, you've looked at it a couple of times. I saw it, but I think just to track the data monthly can't hurt. I mean, are they escalating? I don't know.
Well, isn't really the question how many of those 470, whatever the total was, were in violation of policy? I mean, that's the basic issue. We can track statistics as to the incident, but we're concerned whether it was in compliance with the stated procedures of the department.
Well, my concern as a citizen and with loved ones on this roads and highways of Wichita, I'm concerned with the number that these have the potential to be very dangerous.
And I think that's why the policy was written.
Right.
To provide that assurance and protection.
Well, I feel like 461 is a lot, and I don't want to be, the victim of something that happened because of a pursuit. Am I in the minority here? Nobody else, this number doesn't give heartburn to anybody?
The only thing is, if you're willing to stop, do the criminals say, well, too bad, I can go ahead and do that because they ain't going to chase me.
Yeah, I think the issue...
So, there's that trade-off. I agree if it's, it depends on the crime, so I agreed with that, but I think that we have to be careful here because...
I think the issue is we've identified 400 and some odd number chases or pursuits, but in that context, as Sergeant Kimball identified, the majority of them may have been only momentary because they've been pulled off. And so that's, in that context, the reason they're canceled is because of the public safety issue you've identified.
Right.
So what you're asking, is there a way to know out of these 400, how many of them were more prolonged or presented a more significant risk? And I don't know whether the data is available to allow us to do that, and maybe somebody could make an inquiry and see if there's some way to evaluate that.
Well, it's not even really the pursuit of the officers so much as when that person takes off at a high rate of speed, even if you stop immediately, there's still going to be a bat out of hell to get out of the way. I mean, I can't see them, oh, he's not chasing me, I'm going to slow down. I don't know, is that what they do?
No, they continue to run.
Okay, yeah, and I think that's the concern. They're still running, even though they're not being chased.
We no longer force it.
Right, no, I get it.
We've seen 2 fatality accidents that have been reviewed by this board where the officer turned on the lights.
And turned around.
The other person jackrabbited, the officer stopped.
Yeah.
And they just continued on until they ran a red light and killed somebody.
I was going to say, you can't live in a bubble. I'm sorry. People are going to have accidents. They're going to die.
Well, the question,
sooner or later. You can't live in a bubble.
The question at hand is, does someone want to have an agenda item to, we could have Captain Easter, maybe you could find some more data and just report back, but do we want to make an agenda item on this?
An agenda item, want to review the policy or just,
Agenda item?
Okay, can we not talk about things if it's not really an agenda item?
No, we can't.
Okay.
But we can, but it might be helpful for the department to have.
Oh, sure.
Have access to know in advance.
Oh, yeah. I get
I want to know, I guess, what is it you're wanting?
I want statistics, if you're asking me, I want to know.
I want the board to say
Okay.
what they want, because if I'm just providing you statistics on pursuits, I guess I don't understand what it is the board would want to do with that.
I guess to fairly respond to Twyla's inquiry is just a report as a staff item on what kind of statistical information is available regarding pursuits, so that we can have an understanding of what information might be available, and then we can decide, is there something that we should do or review further. So if you have to open a case number and there is a pursuit field so that you can identify that data and tell us how many there were last year versus the year before, if that's possible, that would be useful information. I don't know what the data exists about. There may not be any data beyond that, but there maybe if there is, it's there.
And maybe we need to look at the policy, like Danny said, look at the policy. If the policy says, you can chase Joe Blow for, down the street at 105 miles an hour and it's okay, no matter what he did, maybe there needs to be a change. We need to look at the policy.
We've looked at it twice, and Sergeant Kimball's right. The supervisor calls them off.
I can tell you those.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying that, the point is that if Twyla wants the statistics, then they're not going to mean anything if she doesn't have the policy and then can question. That's all. And if we're within policy, then it's a moot.
Yeah, well, we all have the policy.
It's a moot problem.
Still review the policy and make recommendations, even if it's within policy.
Right.
Well, that's true, yeah. But if you have the stats, you have the policy and some explanations, then you can decide if that policy is a good policy.
Shanika, it's really going beyond if the policy is good or not. It's just like some of these other things that we measure in context. Are certain of these internal complaints, are they rising, right? Is the number of pursuits, are they rising? Is it, or maybe they're going down. Maybe there's better training now. Maybe they're going down, and which is terrific, and I hope that's the case, right? We've seen citation statistics, right? And they're going down, which is fabulous news. But you don't know until you ask.
That's right.
Yeah. So it's not always bad. It can be great news. And something that you guys could tout your horn or toot your horn about. Yeah.
Well, and the thing is why is it going down? Are you letting the bad guys get away, or you just handling it better, or what?
Yeah.
Or people could just be pulling over when their lights go on, and that cuts down on the...
Okay, anything else?
I'll make a motion for adjournment.
A second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Pleasure to meet you.
I look forward to serving with you. Thank you. As background, Captain Noel